Let's begin here, because many people mistake attraction for appearance alone. They imagine beauty as the decisive key, as though desire could be reduced to surface charm. Yet presence runs deeper than looks, and true magnetism speaks in silence. A woman who knows her worth does not chase attention. She does not beg for approval or overextend herself. Her energy is steady, her boundaries clear, and this creates an unseen pull. Men sense it before they understand it. What captivates is not what she performs, but who she has become. Jung observed this truth. The unconscious responds not to masks, but to symbols of wholeness. Before I continue, let me know where you're listening from in the comments. And if reflections like this resonate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now consider the difference between surface attraction and lasting desire. The first is sparked by novelty or physical charm, but it fades when routine sets in. The second endures because it touches the deeper psyche. Too many try to hold affection through effort and display exhausting themselves in the process. They do not see that desire begins in the unseen, in how you stand, how you carry your own contradictions, how you mirror both strength and softness. This is the threshold between persona and shadow, between the mask we show and the self we truly are. Jung taught that the persona is necessary, but it is not the whole story. When you live only through the mask, connection remains shallow. But when fragments of the shadow, the hidden vulnerable parts, are welcomed, a different current awakens. Desire is not sustained by constant sweetness or constant strength. It is sustained by authenticity, by the quiet revelation that you are more than one note. Think of how a man senses when he is allowed to set down his armor. For a moment, he is not judged, not required to perform. That sanctuary is magnetic. And think of how he responds to contrast, the gentle turning fierce, the strong opening tender. These shifts are not manipulation. They are the natural rhythm of a whole person. This is where we begin our journey. Over the coming reflections, we will uncover 6 deep triggers of desire, not tricks or tactics, but movements of the soul. Each one draws from Jung's insight into archetypes' opposites and the search for completion. When you hear them, notice how they echo in your own life. The outer story is attraction, but the inner story is individuation, the long path toward becoming fully yourself. And that, more than anything else, is what awakens lasting desire. Every journey into truth begins with a breaking point. For many, that fracture appears quietly, almost without notice. A woman tries to hold on to affection through charm, through effort, through gestures that once seemed enough. Yet she begins to feel invisible. His gaze grows distant. His touch becomes routine, and what was once alive falls into silence. The first wound is not abandonment, but indifference. This is the moment where many lose themselves. They believe they must do more, give more, prove more. They perform in order to hold love in place. But performance cannot substitute for presence, and striving cannot replace soul. What cracks here is not only the bond between two people, but the illusion that surface attraction alone sustains desire. Carl Jung observed that the persona, the mask we present to the world, was necessary for survival, but never sufficient for love. Over time, relationships built only on persona harden into predictability. He warned that the cost of living through masks is alienation, a loss of genuine connection with others and with oneself. This alienation shows itself most clearly in desire that fades in intimacy that feels like obligation rather than joy. Think of the countless women who have carried this quiet grief. They wore the smile, spoke the gentle words, kept the home steady, yet felt unseen in their full depth. Men, too, suffer this fracture. Conditioned to appear strong, to silence fear, to swallow insecurity, they become strangers to their own inner life. The relationship then becomes a stage where two actors play roles while the true selves stand waiting behind the curtain. It is here that loneliness begins, even within marriage, even within long companionship. To sit beside someone who cannot see your inner light or who refuses to show his own hidden parts is a loneliness deeper than being alone. The mask of competence, the mask of sweetness, the mask of unbroken control. Each may keep peace for a season, but in the end, they fracture under the weight of their own emptiness. The first fracture is not dramatic. It is not always betrayal, not always conflict. More often, it is the quiet recognition. He does not see me, or she does not know me. It is the slow erosion of intimacy through the small repetitions of inauthentic living. This is the wound of invisibility, and it destabilizes every bond. Jung often spoke of projection, the way we place onto others the qualities we refuse to acknowledge within ourselves. In the early stages of romance, projections create intensity. A man sees in a woman his unexpressed tenderness, his hidden longing for mystery. A woman sees in a man her unclaimed strength, her desire for certainty. But projections cannot last. Once the mask falls away, the ordinary person appears. If both remain trapped in persona, the disillusionment hardens into resentment. This disillusionment is the fracture point. It is when desire no longer flows freely but requires effort to maintain. And many people, in fear of loss, begin to demand rather than invite. They confuse control with intimacy, thinking if they speak louder or bend further, the other will return. Yet control only deepens the divide. Notice the symbolism here. The mask cracks, the projection dissolves, the light grows dim. The union that once promised wholeness begins to reveal its fractures. This moment, painful as it is, becomes the invitation to a deeper path. Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming whole beyond roles and beyond masks. But individuation begins with the recognition that the old way has failed. Let us pause here. Many women, especially later in life, recognize this fracture with great clarity. They gave years to keeping appearances, yet inside they carried an ache that no one acknowledged. They began to suspect that something within them was unfinished, that love built on persona cannot sustain the soul. It is a heavy truth, but also the beginning of liberation. The fracture does not mean failure. It is the signal that the surface is no longer enough. It is the psyche's way of saying go deeper or remain unfulfilled. Without this moment of discomfort, no transformation can take place. It is the crack in the shell that allows light to enter. From this point onward, every choice, will be shaped by awareness. Does she return to the mask, reinforcing the performance? Or does she allow the fracture to expose what is real, even if it brings pain? Desire cannot be reborn through effort alone. It can only awaken where the shadow is allowed, where masks are set down, and where the self is met without pretense. Let us consider the symbol of a mirror. In early love, the mirror is polished and flattering. Each sees in the other what they long for. But as time passes, the mirror clouds. Without courage, both retreat into illusion, refusing to clean the glass. Yet when one dares to wipe away the fog, they see not only the partner, but themselves reflected back, unfiltered, unmasked, and real. That is the work the fracture demands. The fracture is therefore a gift, though at first it feels like loss. It says, the performance is over. The truth must enter. Without it, intimacy would remain shallow, confined to surface roles. With it, a door opens into deeper connection if both are willing to walk through. But this willingness is rare, and that is why so many remain stuck in patterns of shallow desire. They seek novelty outside or control inside instead of facing the fracture within. The shadow Jung taught is what we deny in ourselves. When we refuse it, we project it onto others, and the cycle of disappointment continues. But when we turn toward it, desire finds a new depth, because the relationship becomes a sanctuary rather than a stage. So, this is the truth of the first fracture. It is not the end, but the beginning. It exposes the false foundation so that a stronger one may be built. It unmasks the illusion so that authenticity may emerge. It calls both man and woman to lay down their roles, to risk being truly seen, to risk seeing the other in return. Without this step, the rest of the journey cannot unfold. The 6 deep triggers of desire shadow anima, contrast hero transcendence, and wholeness are meaningless if one remains trapped in persona. The fracture clears the ground. It says, here is where the old breaks so the new may grow. In the chapters to come, we will see how each of these principles offers a path forward, but none of them can be understood without first acknowledging this wound. Attraction begins at the surface, but desire that endures begins here at the breaking point where illusions fall away. And so the path deepens. The first fracture has been revealed. What remains is the confrontation with the shadow itself, the hidden part each partner carries, waiting for a safe mirror to awaken it. That is where we now turn. The fracture we explored before opens the path to a deeper confrontation. It reveals not only the cracks in the relationship, but the split within each individual. On one side stands the persona, the carefully polished mask that society rewards. On the other side waits the shadow, the unacknowledged, often unwanted aspects of the self. This is where tension truly rises, because desire cannot flourish, where only masks are allowed to meet. The persona appears respectable, dependable, and consistent. It says all the right words, maintains the role of good partner, and performs the duties of love. But behind the mask lies exhaustion, resentment, and the longing to be seen in full. Many women know this ache. They smile when weary nurture, when empty, and offer patience even when their own soul craves recognition. Over time, the mask grows heavy, And what began as harmony becomes hollow repetition. The shadow is different. It holds the feelings we hide: anger, jealousy, desire, fear, and vulnerability. For men, this shadow often contains their softer emotions, their grief, their longing for comfort. For women, it may contain their fierceness, their boundaries, or their unapologetic needs. Jung reminded us that whatever we repress does not vanish. It waits beneath the surface, coloring every word and gesture. And in intimacy, that hidden part always demands a voice. Here lies the paradox. What we hide is often what magnetizes. A man drawn to a woman feels not only her charm, but also her wholeness, her unspoken strength, her quiet mystery, her capacity to hold both light and dark. When she dares to acknowledge her shadow without shame, she becomes magnetic. Likewise, when she becomes a safe mirror for his hidden parts, he feels the rare freedom to set down his armor. This is not weakness, it is sanctuary, and sanctuary awakens desire. But the persona resists this truth. It whispers that safety is found in predictability, that love must remain tidy and controlled. It warns us never to show too much, never to reveal the parts that others might not approve of. So men stay silent about their fears, and women silence their power. Each plays the role expected of them, while the unlived parts of the self grow restless in the shadows. This is why passion fades, not because two people lack affection, but because they refuse to risk being seen in full. Desire thrives in contrast. Jung described this as the union of opposites, the meeting of light and dark strength, and tenderness, confidence, and vulnerability. When we collapse into one dimension, always nurturing, always strong, always agreeable, we lose the very tension that stirs the soul. A woman who can be gentle, yet firm, soft, yet unyielding, creates mystery. She reminds him that he is not seeing a role, but a living, breathing whole. The shadow versus persona conflict is not simply about attraction. It is the cost of self-betrayal. Living only through persona leaves a person unseen even in their own home. The result is emptiness, sometimes even despair. How many times has a woman given everything only to feel invisible? How many men have performed strength so perfectly that no one ever thinks to ask what they truly need? This is the hidden fracture within the fracture, the loss of intimacy with the self. Integration begins when we stop fighting the shadow. To look into one's own darkness is not to become consumed by it, but to see clearly what has always been there. Jung warned that until the unconscious is made conscious, it will direct our lives and we will call it fate. This is true in love as much as in life. The unspoken parts of us script the story unless we choose to recognize them. The image of a mirror returns here with even greater weight. In the early stage, the mirror flatters. Later, the mirror becomes fogged. But when the mask slips, the mirror suddenly reveals both the persona and the shadow together. This is frightening at first. Many turn away, unwilling to see the fullness of themselves or their partner. Yet this is the precise threshold where real desire awakens. For to be seen in wholeness, and not only in performance, is to feel alive again. It is important to remember the shadow is not simply negative. It holds vitality, creativity, and authenticity. A woman who integrates her fierceness can set boundaries with grace. A man who integrates his vulnerability can love without fear of appearing weak. In each case, the shadow carries the very qualities that renew passion. What kills desire is not the shadow itself, but the refusal to acknowledge it. Consider the cycle. When she hides her needs, resentment grows. When he hides his fears, distance grows. The persona insists on calm surfaces, but beneath them, storms begin to build. At some point, the storm breaks often in conflict or silence. Yet conflict is not the enemy. It is the voice of the shadow demanding recognition. The real danger is silence, the agreement to keep wearing masks, to live beside each other as actors instead of souls. To step out of this cycle is to risk. It means showing anger without letting it destroy, admitting desire without shame, confessing fear without retreat. It means daring to reveal the parts you once hid and daring to receive the hidden parts of another. This risk, though uncomfortable, is the soil of intimacy. Without it, relationships wither. With it, desire deepens and transforms. In this stage of the journey, many retreat, fearing the cost of honesty. They worry that revealing their shadow will drive the other away. And sometimes it does. But if a bond cannot hold truth, it was never whole to begin with. The path of individuation requires this courage. It asks us to be more than masks, to step into the tension of opposites, and to allow the shadow to stand beside the persona. This is the heart of the third movement. The conflict between mask and truth is the turning point of every relationship and every life. To remain in persona is to remain unseen. To embrace the shadow is to step toward wholeness, and only wholeness can sustain attraction, because attraction, at its root, is the call of the soul to its own completeness. As we move forward, the question becomes, what happens when one dares to look at this shadow directly, and rather than turning away, chooses to honor it? That is the awakening. That is the moment when desire ceases to be shallow and becomes transformative. It is the threshold we now approach. The struggle between persona and shadow cannot last forever. Masks may hold for years, but they eventually crumble under the weight of silence. When this collapse comes, a moment of awakening follows. It is rarely comfortable, for the truth of the unconscious rarely arrives as ease. It comes as a stirring, a sudden recognition that the old patterns no longer carry life. What once seemed necessary, constant control, endless performance, now feels like chains. And in that recognition, a door begins to open. Awakening is not the arrival of perfection. It is the shift from living as a role to living as a soul. Jung described individuation as the path toward wholeness, where a person no longer identifies only with a mask or a projection. Instead, they begin to integrate the forgotten parts, the silenced voices, the neglected instincts. In relationships, this awakening feels like breathing after years of holding one's breath. It is the moment when one says, "I will no longer live half a life." At first, this awakening appears in subtle ways. A woman may sense that her worth does not depend on pleasing others. A man may feel that his strength is not in hiding weakness, but in facing it. These are small cracks of light, yet they change everything. For when one soul begins to wake, the whole relationship shifts. The air grows charged because authenticity always calls forth response. This turning is often symbolized by mirrors and doors. The mirror shows us both light and shadow together. We no longer turn away. We no longer polish only what is flattering. Instead, we allow the reflection to speak truth. The door symbolizes the crossing into new territory. To walk through is to leave the safety of masks and to risk the vulnerability of being seen whole. Both symbols belong to awakening the mirror that reveals and the door that invites. Here, Jung's archetypes come alive. The inner hero awakens in a man when his courage is honored, not demanded. He longs not to dominate, but to protect, to create meaning, to leave a mark. When a woman recognizes this heroic essence, she does not shrink to make him feel large. She reflects his true potential back to him, and in that recognition he rises. This is not flattery, but resonance. It is the sacred exchange that awakens devotion. For women, awakening often arrives through connection with the transcendent feminine. She begins to see her body not as an object to perform, but as a vessel of life rhythm and sacred energy. Sexuality ceases to be a performance and becomes presence. In this presence, intimacy becomes more than physical. It becomes spiritual union, a dissolving of boundaries where masculine and feminine meet as equal forces. Jung understood this as the anima and animus, the eternal polarities seeking balance. When honored consciously, they do not consume each other, but create wholeness. Desire itself changes during awakening. It no longer clings to novelty or performance. It deepens into longing for union of opposites, for connection that transcends time. A woman who embodies her multiplicity, tender and fierce, receptive and strong, awakens in a man the mystery of life itself. A man who embodies his strength and vulnerability together awakens in a woman the reassurance of true presence. Each stirs the other's unconscious, calling forth what was hidden. This is why awakening in love feels both terrifying and magnetic. Fear often rises at this threshold. The persona resists whispering that it is safer to remain in roles. The shadow warns of rejection if revealed. Yet to refuse this step is to remain in shallow waters where desire eventually withers. Awakening demands risk. It asks us to stand unmasked, uncertain, yet willing to be seen. Only in this space can intimacy root itself in truth. Consider the archetype of contrast. Desire lives where contradictions breathe side by side. Too much sameness dulls the senses. But when a woman allows both her nurturing and her mystery, both her strength and her softness, she awakens an energy that is endlessly renewing. The man, too, when he steps beyond stoicism and allows tenderness, creates a resonance that deepens connection. Awakening is not the destruction of opposites, but their embrace. This movement of awakening is also deeply personal. It is not only about what happens between two people. It is about what happens within the soul. A woman who awakens to her own power may discover forgotten dreams, creativity long buried, or a voice that will no longer remain silent. A man who awakens to his own depth may rediscover joy, the capacity to weep, or the strength to forgive. These inner shifts ripple outward, transforming relationships as naturally as dawn transforms night. Awakening, however, is not a single moment. It is a process unfolding layer by layer. Each revelation calls forth another. Each confrontation with shadow brings new integration. Jung compared it to alchemy, the slow transformation of base material into gold. In the psyche, the base material is the unacknowledged self. The gold is wholeness. The fire of transformation is the willingness to face truth. This is why awakening feels like both burning and renewal at once. In love, this alchemy awakens devotion that cannot be explained by surface attraction. It is the devotion born when two souls meet in their depth, not their disguise. A man who feels truly seen does not forget. A woman who feels truly honored does not fade. This is why some relationships endure beyond storms, while others crumble despite appearances. Depth sustains what surface cannot. To awaken is also to accept responsibility. With consciousness comes the knowledge that games and manipulations no longer serve. One cannot pretend to be whole. One must do the work daily humbly, with patience. The awakened soul understands that intimacy requires not perfection, but presence. It requires meeting another where they are while remaining rooted in one's own center. This balance is delicate, yet it is the soil where lasting desire grows. As we reflect on this stage, let us see awakening not as a destination, but as an opening. It is the threshold where old illusions dissolve, where masks lose their hold, and where the soul begins to speak. It is both frightening and liberating, for it strips away what is false while revealing what is real. And though the path is uncertain, the reward is great, the possibility of love that endures because it is built on truth. In the next movement, we will see how awakening leads to choice. For awareness without action changes nothing. The question becomes, how does one live from this awakening? How does one set boundaries, claim standards, and step into transformation? That is the work of the next step, the moment when awakening becomes life. Awakening by itself changes little. It opens the door, but someone must walk through. After recognizing the mask, after glimpsing the shadow, after sensing the deeper patterns of desire, the next step is choice. Without choice, awakening fades back into sleep. The persona regains its grip, and old habits return. Transformation begins only when awareness is shaped into action. In every meaningful relationship, this moment arrives. She sees clearly that her worth does not rest in constant sacrifice. He senses that hiding behind strength robs him of intimacy. Both stand at the threshold where truth demands embodiment. Here, the task is not grand gestures, but steady standards living by what is authentic rather than what is expected. Jung described this as individuation, the process of becoming whole, guided not by external approval, but by the self. Choice often begins with boundaries. A boundary is not a wall, but a line that honors dignity. It says, "This I will accept, and this I will not." Boundaries are the practical expression of awakening. They convert inner clarity into outer reality. Without them, the old cycle repeats. Resentment builds desire, fades, and intimacy withers. With them, love gains structure and safety. Boundaries can feel frightening, especially for those long trained to please. Yet without them, one lives as a ghost, present in body, but absent in soul. A woman who sets a boundary does not diminish love. She purifies it. She insists that connection be mutual, that presence be real, that respect be given. In that insistence, she transforms not only how she is treated, but how she sees herself. Choice also means stepping away from demands. Demands are rooted in fear, the fear of being forgotten, the fear of being unloved. Demands shout, "You must," but standards speak quietly. "This is who I am." Desire cannot survive in an atmosphere of control. It breathes freely when love is chosen, not coerced. To set standards is to trust that what is authentic will call forth the right response. Here we see a paradox. The persona seeks security through control, but control erodes attraction. The shadow, when integrated, accepts uncertainty, and paradoxically, this creates deeper trust. By releasing demands and embodying standards, one becomes magnetic. The partner is invited to rise, not forced. Jung often reminded us that the psyche resists compulsion, but responds to invitation. Transformation respects this law. Symbolically, this stage is like tending a fire. Without boundaries, the fire spreads wildly and destroys. With too much control, the fire is smothered. But with proper tending, with airspace and structure, the flame burns steadily, giving warmth and light. Boundaries and standards are the stones of the hearth. They contain the fire without extinguishing it. In practice, transformation shows itself in small choices. She no longer accepts being spoken to with disregard. He no longer hides every vulnerability. Each begins to live aligned with their center rather than with fear. This alignment carries consequences. Some relationships cannot survive. It for masks resist truth. Yet even endings here are not failures. They are acts of fidelity to the soul, refusals to remain in illusions. Transformation is never without cost. Jung compared individuation to alchemy, where base metals are burned, dissolved, and reformed into gold. The fire of this process is not comfortable, but it is necessary. The gold cannot be reached without the melting of what was rigid. In love, this means letting die the false peace of performance so that true intimacy may be born. It is also important to see that choice must be lived daily. Awakening is not one dramatic moment, but a series of decisions. Each time fear whispers, the choice must be made again. To return to the mask or to remain in truth. Each time resentment tempts the choice must be made again to demand or to embody a standard. Transformation is slow and steady, not sudden and complete. Yet over time, these small choices reshape the entire relationship. Desire, once thought lost, rekindles. Respect deepens. The bond grows not from illusion, but from reality. Attraction becomes less about novelty and more about depth. The presence of two whole selves facing each other without masks creates a field of energy that endures. There is also an individual fruit of this stage. When one learns to set boundaries and embody standards, life itself begins to change. Relationships beyond romance shift. Family friendships and work dynamics adjust to the new center. People sense the change. They respond differently because they encounter not a mask, but a person living from wholeness. The transformation is contagious. This stage also heals the inner split. For too long, the persona fought the shadow. Boundaries reconcile them. The persona no longer has to carry everything. The shadow no longer has to erupt unconsciously. Both are acknowledged, integrated, and given voice. This inner harmony radiates outward, and others feel it as calm strength. The danger of this stage is pride. Once boundaries are discovered, some may wield them harshly, mistaking them for weapons. But true boundaries are not punishments. They are quiet affirmations of value. They protect without aggression, and they invite without fear. Transformation rests in this balance, firm yet gentle, strong yet open. In this light, desire itself transforms. It becomes less about conquest, more about reverence, less about possession, more about presence. When both partners live by standards rather than demands, intimacy becomes sacred space. Each feels safe to reveal both persona and shadow, knowing they will be met with honesty and respect. That safety is the soil where passion grows. At its core, transformation is the movement from unconscious repetition to conscious creation. Before patterns ruled silently, now awareness and choice shape the bond. The relationship becomes a vessel of growth, where both partners become more of themselves, not less. This is the true fruit of individuation, not isolation, but deeper connection, born of wholeness. As we close this stage, remember that transformation is not about perfection. It is about integrity. It is about standing in truth, even when it shakes the old structures. It is about tending the fire so that it warms rather than consumes. When standards are honored, when boundaries are set, love ceases to be a stage play and becomes a living dialogue between souls. And so the journey moves toward completion. The fracture has revealed itself. The mask has been challenged. The awakening has come and the choice has been made. What remains is integration. The final movement brings all pieces together: the light and the shadow, the masculine and the feminine, the standards and the devotion into a lesson of wholeness. That is where we turn next. Every journey must return to stillness. After the fracture, the struggle with masks, the awakening, and the setting of new standards, we arrive at the point where all pieces are gathered into one whole. This final movement is not about victory or defeat. It is about integration. What does it mean to integrate? It means that the shadow is no longer an enemy. The persona is no longer mistaken for the entire self. The inner opposite, strength and tenderness, fear and courage, control and surrender, are no longer at war. They coexist. They form a living balance. This is what Jung called individuation, the unfolding of the true self, where nothing essential is denied and nothing false is exalted. In love, this integration changes everything. Desire is no longer fragile, dependent on novelty, or on endless effort. It becomes steady, rooted in mutual recognition. A man who feels seen in his entirety does not drift easily into indifference. A woman who honors her wholeness does not beg for scraps of affection. Both stand with dignity, and in that dignity, devotion deepens. The lesson is not that desire can be endlessly controlled or manufactured. The lesson is that wholeness awakens attraction in ways surface beauty never could. When you stand integrated, acknowledging your shadow, embodying your light, honoring your standards, you radiate an energy that calls forth authenticity in others. Attraction becomes less about performance and more about resonance. There is a quiet power in this. It is not loud, not manipulative, not desperate. It does not grasp or cling. Instead, it waits, centered in itself, confident that what is true will remain. This is why the most magnetic presence is often the one that rests in stillness, the one that has nothing to prove. Integration also means accepting that relationships are mirrors. The one before you reflects your light and your shadow. When you meet them with presence instead of projection, you open space for both souls to grow. Sometimes this growth deepens love. Sometimes it calls for letting go. But in either case, the soul matures and wholeness expands. In symbolic terms, we might say, the house of the psyche now has open windows. Light flows freely from room to room. Shadows remain, but they are not locked away. They are acknowledged as part of the structure, giving it depth and character. In such a house, one can finally rest. One can finally invite another in without fear. This is where individuation touches not only intimacy, but life itself. A person who integrates their shadow does not merely transform relationships. They find new creativity, new clarity of purpose, new resilience in the face of change. They no longer spend endless energy maintaining masks. They live closer to the center, and from that center, life unfolds more freely. For older listeners, this truth carries even more weight. In the second half of life, the call to individuation grows louder. Outer achievements, roles, and appearances fade in importance. The soul begins to long for depth, for meaning, for integration. To embrace this call is to enter the later years not as decline, but as fulfillment. It is the time when wholeness, long delayed, finally seeks its expression. So the closing lesson is simple, though not easy. Wholeness is the key to enduring connection. Standards are the soil, boundaries are the walls, presence is the light, and integration is the roof. Within this inner house, desire can live without fear of collapse. And even when love shifts or changes form, the integrity of the soul remains. Jung once said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The journey we have traced is the act of making conscious what once hid in shadow. It is the path of becoming responsible for your own depth, your own radiance, your own power to connect. That is the true gift, not just the awakening of desire, but the discovery of yourself as whole. So, let us end with this reflection. Attraction is not a trick to be mastered. It is the natural resonance of wholeness meeting wholeness. It is the recognition of two souls daring to be seen without masks, daring to hold each other's shadows with respect. Such love does not burn out quickly. It deepens like roots finding water, like light spreading quietly at dawn. As you carry these reflections, ask yourself, where in your own life do you still cling to the mask? Where do you still hide your shadow? And where might you set a boundary that honors your worth? These are not questions of theory. They are invitations to live from center to embody the integration you now understand. If this journey has spoken to you, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what part of this reflection touched you most or where you find yourself on this path of awakening. Your voice may resonate with someone who listens tonight in silence, longing for the same clarity. And remember, the work of wholeness is never finished. It is the rhythm of a lifetime. But each choice to live in truth, each step toward integration becomes part of a deeper inheritance, a soul at peace with itself, and a love rooted in what endures.